Jeff, welcome to the Land Podcast. How's it going?
Good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. We've pounded what I'll call the Corn Belt or the Midwest, and now we're venturing a little bit further west. And you're in Kansas, so go ahead and introduce yourself for everyone.
Yeah, you finally make your way out to the good ground, huh? No, I'm Jeff Simpson. I'm I'm a Kansas native. Just it's always kind of been home to me, even when I've ventured out of state lines. But set up roots and spending a lot of time out in Western Kansas, Central Kansas, and really all over the state. And enjoying all my time out there.
Did you grow up on a farm, or what was your upbringing like out there in Kansas?
It was a quasi farm. I mean, so when I was young, I was born in Abilene, Kansas, which is out in the middle of nowhere. But as we entered school phase and all that, we moved over actually just across the state line on the Missouri side. Ended up going to high school at Blue Springs, Missouri, which was a great school for sports and academics, and that worked out well for us. But we lived on the outskirts of town. We didn't have a lot, but we were always out on neighboring farms and ranches helping them, and it's always been kind of part of the lifestyle.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. And so we were just talking. You were an Iowa resident for like 2 years or a year.
Yeah, yep. 2 years up in Albia.
What brought you there?
The deer.
Yeah, makes sense. That checks
Yeah,
out.
I wasn't married. I wasn't bound down as much as I am now, which I say that in the most respectful, positive way possible. But I had a little window of opportunity up there and live up there, do some work, and get to hunt big deer, and so I took advantage of it.
Yeah, and so the question I'm sure people are asking. So you live in Albia and you left. That's crazy. It's probably what most people are thinking, just because it's crazy how that small little town has grew a reputation that it has, and it's like a melting pot for whitetail talent, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
There's a couple of those across the country, and Albia is definitely one of them. So, do you move back to Kansas? Was that just to be closer to family, or different opportunities, or what? What was the purpose?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of both. I think it was work opportunities as well as family and all of that. And I ended up getting married, and Albia was not on the list of dream places to live for her. So
Uh-huh.
um, we moved further down south, not too far. I mean, even right now, I could be in Albia in 2.5 hours. It's not very far from me.
Hmm.
Um, so no, I loved my time there, but I still home always has been and will be Kansas for me.
Yeah. And so you have I did a little bit of a deep dive. So you have a photography and marketing background, and I was creeping some of your pictures. Definitely a talented photographer. And you also were one of the starters of founders of Heartland Bowhunter. Is that right?
I was, yeah, yeah. I started that many moons ago, but drew the logo on a napkin and got that thing rolling for the first basically 2 years, and then bowed out and moved
Hmm.
on in life.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's really neat. And so, what's been your relationship with real estate over the years? I mean, obviously you're a licensed agent now, but some people I think have a natural inkling of real estate. It is whether it's their upbringing or just they're naturally curious of how it works or what it is. What was that for you?
I think when I got done with college and started doing a lot more hunting and that kind of stuff, I was always involved in the ranches and farms that I was hunting on. Had a couple really large leases out in central Kansas. I would help run combines and other things. So I've always kind of been involved and kind of lean that way. I probably took way too long to get into the real estate side because I've bought and sold farms. I've helped other people find farms to buy, and wasn't involved as an agent or a broker,
Hmm.
but had my hand in them pretty deep.
Yeah, and so it's it's funny that you mentioned like you wish you would have done it earlier, and I think that comes to land ownership, especially with a lot of the guests we've had on here. Is they wish they would have done it sooner, or they wish they would have bought more. Obviously, hindsight's always 2020, and when things
Yeah.
work out, it's easy to say I was more. I wish I was more aggressive. But I guess explain that in a little bit more detail if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, I think everybody's got their own circumstances around that. I had my marketing business was doing well, and I was focused on that. And a person only has so much time, right? I always in the back of my head knew that I would start to do the land sales and brokerage and all of that, but I just didn't. The timing wasn't right. Whereas now it is. So I don't really regret any of it, but I do think that if I was a little better time manager, I probably could have got into it a little earlier. But
Sure.
I have 3 kids as well, so time management just goes right on out the window when you have 3 little ones. So
Hmm. What draws you to land ownership? Because I mean, obviously this is a little bit different of an echo chamber because anyone listening to this is obviously interested in land. But when you talk to people outside of this tiny little echo chamber, this very, very, very small population of the country, a lot of people think land is crazy or doesn't make sense, or everyone has their own perception of this. But what excites you about land from an ownership perspective and also just an investment perspective?
oh man, there's a lot to unpack there. I think you're crazy if you don't like land. I mean, you think of all the things that are available to us, right, in the world. There's very few things you can say humans can't make more of. And land is, the first thing on that list, in my opinion. So,
Hmm.
there's something about it that's pure and it's a limited resource, and it offers so much value to your life. I mean, I have it, something I tell my kids and I've told them for years and years and years and years is that the answers are always in the dirt. And that can take on a lot of meaning, but for them, it's like, get outside, get in the dirt, go play, go have fun. Um, there's financial answers in the dirt. There's recreational value in the dirt. There's soul cleansing in the dirt. There's, to me, the answers are in the dirt. And
Hmm.
it's kind of been that way my whole life and has nothing to do with real estate. It has everything to do with just lifestyle.
Hmm.
Um, so I think you can argue it any way you want, but I've been drawn to it. We've had great financial investments with land. We've also had a lot of emotional tie to the land that you own. I took ecology classes in college, and I have a very strong opinion on making sure that a piece of dirt, once my name is on it, leaves my name in better condition than when I got it.
Hmm.
The old adage of give more than you take. I think that's the driving force of good ownership. Landowners that can do that, stewards of the land that can do that, even people that lease that can do that. And I think if you're giving more than you take, then you're on the right path.
Hmm. What do you think some landowners may fall short on? Because obviously you have an academic background in that. So like, what's a common mistake that maybe it's just basically a myth when it comes to land of taking care of it. So whether that's, and I know there's a lot of opinions when it comes to different types of farming practices and everything else, but what's one that you can, stand on and say, hey, I think we should all take a harder look at doing this type of farming practice or this type of land management that you think could be better?
Well, the buzzword right now is regenerative farming, right? I mean,
Yep.
that's everywhere right now. But and that's been said and done and told a million different ways for all the years. But I do think there is a link. Um, I think there's a link of, one of the things we're experiencing in Kansas right now is our native quail population is coming back really strong. But it's really coming back in areas where people have taken certain amount of acreage out of crop production and put it back into hay production. And there's
Mm.
a lot less spraying going on in those areas. And I don't know for sure. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a biologist, but I got to think there's some relation of how much spray and chemical we're putting down that to those birds surviving and thriving. Um, and this same thing goes with turkey. Same thing goes with whitetail. I mean, when we spray stuff on alfalfa to kill weevils, and it's a drop rate of 1 ounce per acre, that's some pretty nasty stuff,
Yeah.
right? I can't imagine ingesting that, because then you see deer out in that same field that night after it's been sprayed, eating on it.
Hmm.
There's things like that that I'm very conscious of that I hope others are as well. And if we can limit that a little bit, that'd be great. I mean, I understand that there's farming and we're trying to produce as many cuts and volume and as we can based off of our needs there. But if we can at least be paying attention to it and getting a little bit better, if we can take one step, we have to take 10 steps at a time. Just take one step at a time.
Hmm.
I think that's a good policy for all landowners and ranch managers to try to implement.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like there's quite a bit of an undercurrent of people looking at farming practices and thinking outside the box. And I know that maybe that just might be a product of the people I talk with too, but I have found that to be really refreshing and interesting too, of just looking at things differently and how can we improve and looking at a holistic approach of all the impact we really do have on the landscape
Yeah.
we all live on. I mean, we're all
we
playing in the
make a
same
lot of
playground.
we make a lot of decisions, right? I mean, each one of those decisions, if we can dissect them and try to keep things in a bigger picture, I think it benefits all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kansas is kind of unique to me because, you know, and it's probably because I haven't dove into it much, but you look at the state of Kansas, right? And you go from east to west. It's it shouldn't be one state. It's crazy. It's like there's like three distinct or maybe two distinct types of, and you tell me, like Kansas is a very interesting state to me. So I just want to hear about what do you like about Kansas and what do you think is unique about Kansas? Because you obviously
I love all of it. I
uh-huh.
think we have such a great state. I mean, we have the Gyp Hills, we have the Flint Hills, we have up along Tuttle Creek, we have some great hills up there, and then we have the flat grounds, the crop ground, the stuff you see driving down I-70 is probably the most unflattering of the entire state. And then the entire eastern band, we're full of big timber. The Missouri River. We have, there's a lot of there's a lot of habitat. There's a lot of different habitat. Um, there's arid. There's very wet. There's everything in between, and it offers a lot.
Hmm.
It's certainly the gateway to the West. I think once you get maybe an hour and a half outside of Kansas City to the west, you physically see all of it change. You see the warm season native grasses, you see the rolling dirty pastures, the cedars, and I think that's what people think of a lot when they think of Kansas.
Hmm.
Um, and then you get out further and you start to see the pivots and you see the large ag fields. And if you go south, you see the sandy, a lot more sandy terrain and cactus and raising cotton and red dirt. Everybody thinks red dirt's Oklahoma and Texas. We have lots of red dirt in Kansas. If you've never seen the Gyp Hills outside of Medicine Lodge and Barber County and all that, if someone dropped you there, you would not think you were in Kansas.
Hmm.
There's quite a bit of elevation change. There's elk down there. We have a lot of diversity. Basically, is what
Yeah.
I'm getting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I look at states like Iowa or Illinois or Indiana or Ohio. I mean, it's pretty much, you know,
Yeah, it is what it is, right?
yeah.
It's great.
There's not elk, there's not mule deer, there's not a bunch of upland birds, and that's kind of interesting about Kansas is there's so much to offer,
Yeah,
and
antelope too.
yeah, yeah, and so the list is pretty long, but I think a lot of people that listen to this are more whitetail centric, and so I guess you know, I look at that and I think this is just a perception of most people of you should hunt on, the draws, the creeks, the creek systems. Like that's where you're going to find the most success in Kansas. And when it's
Yeah.
so diverse, I have to imagine that may be a fallacy.
To an extent, it is. I mean, I think it's just like everywhere else. Water's king. There is no life without water. So I think that's probably the first lesson people need to know when they look at land is there's no life without water. Make
Hmm.
sure you have enough water, make it easy on them, and you'll have more life on your land.
Hmm.
Um, so that aside, I think a lot of people hunt this state incorrectly. A lot of people get down in the draws and they want to be at the head where they all meet, and then they get winded by everything in the county.
Hmm.
Um, but there's certain things that drive movement, and it's unique to here. That's for sure.
So, what would be the right way to set up on something like that specific terrain feature in your mind?
For me, so personally, and this is just my opinion, I am not an expert. I don't proclaim to be an expert in anything. The older I get, the less I know.
Yep.
But what has worked well for me over the last 25, 30 years is if I stay up top where I have somewhat of a true wind and I can make sure that it's dumping down towards something where I'm not expecting them to come from, and I can let them have the lower draws and pull them up, I have a lot more success than I do trying to get down in there and not get winded.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Okay.
if I can hunt, if I'm on a hill, when I'm looking at stand location or blind location or any, glassing, anything, I want to be on the top third. If I can be on the top third, my wind seems to treat me a whole lot better than if I'm in the bottom two-thirds.
Hmm. Okay, that's a good rule of thumb. Now, something that I find interesting with Kansas is, I think a lot of people are used to different type of rental rates, CRP rates, and I'm
Yes,
jumping around looking at some listings, and I'm like, it's not much, man. Like for some parts
it's
of the
not a
state,
typo,
I
I
mean,
promise.
yeah, it's like $30, $40, and I'm like, that's all they can raise off that thing, and still make money. So as because I think a lot of people look at, there's different types of buyers obviously across the board, but a lot of guys they want to buy something and have some sort of cash flow or some sort of income off a parcel. When you're looking at a piece in Kansas, it's pretty low. So I'm
It's very
calling you. and I'm just saying, hey Jeff, I'm looking at this budget, and it can be whatever, 50% tillable, 50% non-income, let's just say, or CRP, whatever. How do you explain to them, or how like what's the hurdle there mentally of like, yeah, it's not going to crank out as much income as XYZ state, but, and this is what you say.
It's mostly you guys in Illinois, but um,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
um, yeah, I mean the dirt's not black here, so you're not going to get that. And the yields and it's just not the same. You're
Mhm.
apples and oranges. But to overcome that conversation is that yes, we have low rent rates. I mean, there's cash rents out there all over the place that are for $25 an acre. Now, we do have more acreage, significantly more acreage in some of those.
Mhm.
So there is an offset there. But what I tell people all the time is like, look, get with your local NRCS office, see if you can pull some of that tillable into a CRP program. It will pay better than cash rent. Okay, there's option number one.
Mhm.
Option number two
And
is
what
a
would
lot of
and just as a rule of thumb, I know it's soil specific and everything else, but let's say you could get $25 an acre cash rent, CRP like 30 or 40 or 45, or I mean, I'm sure it
man,
all depends,
it
or
is
maybe
all over the map on that. That's very
uh,
specific to the property.
sure,
So, but at least you have something to compare it against, right?
right.
So, and the other option too is a lot of this ground has been broken, and probably should not have been. Not a lot of it, but some of it. Especially when we get into real canyony land and there's a top that's broken and put into tillable and it's not producing very well. Well, it probably was never meant to produce.
Hmm.
So you could look at seeding that back into native grass hay and probably get more money out of the hay production than you are the crops.
Hmm.
So that's another option as well. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? And if grazing rights pay pretty well, but grazing is not something that deer hunters love to hear about or do.
Hmm.
Although, limited time frame grazing contracts are great. Let's say you do plant some milo and you have stalks, you can graze the stalks. You can make sure you have windows of time where you can create income in different ways. You just have to think about it a little differently out here than you would in Illinois or
Sure.
Iowa, places
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. That's the that's kind of the fun thing of trying to figure out how, all the nuances of the entire state, because I have to imagine the eastern part is probably more traditional to what
It
most
is.
Midwest guys think, and then further you get west, the more like I'm out of my element here. I don't know what's going on. Like, there's
Yeah,
a lot to unfold here.
you get in those river bottoms, and some of that ground's great. I mean, and you get into some ground is sub irrigated along the rivers, and that ground's high production. So I mean, it just depends on what piece you're looking at.
Hmm. Yeah, and so in your mind, for someone that is looking across the country, and maybe their short list is, we'll say, landowner friendly states. So let's say Ohio, let's say Illinois, let's say Kansas, because they're looking for something over 80. What's your pitch to Kansas? And maybe you don't want to blow up your state, but I mean,
Yeah, I mean, Kansas isn't a secret, so
fair enough.
I don't mind talking about it. But it's I don't really pitch it. I think you have to like what you're looking at. And that's a big conversation, especially with deer hunters, out of state deer hunters, because if you don't like what you're looking at, you're not going to have as good a time out there as you should, especially as a landowner.
Hmm.
And if you've grown up hunting the hardwoods of Ohio on the hills and in the big timber and thousands of acres of hardwoods and oak trees and all that, and then all of a sudden you say, I'm going to come out to Kiowa County, Kansas, and you show up and you're like, is there a tree here? Like one
Yeah,
tree in the entire county? And you're like, how am I? There's no deer here, right? That's the immediate assumption. And the truth is, those are grass deer. And you could plant a patch of trees, and those deer are likely going to bed in the grass anyway. Um,
interesting.
yeah, it's just it's a different animal almost. But at the same time, in some of these big rolling hills, and there's a lot of undulation in these hills. I mean, a lot of times from the county roads, you can't see very far because of the roll. And then you get tall grass years like this year, and you can't see a darn thing. Um, there's some big deer out there. There's some really big, mature. Our age classes are really strong in those grassy areas, just because I think people to get out there and they don't hunt them.
Yeah,
But again, if you're sitting in a blind and you've convinced yourself that it's never going to happen, then it's never going to happen.
yeah.
So your enjoyment factor of your land. I think if you're putting money and resource and time into owning a property or being on a property, investing your time, you got to like it. So I don't pitch people on that. I pitch them to say you have to accept it for what it is, and you have to like and want to participate in that, and then you're good.
Mhm.
If you like Ohio and the colors and the hills and everybody hunting 40 acres, then get after it.
Yeah.
If you want big country and want to see a little more of a western feel, and everybody used to be enamored by like Milk River up in Montana because it's such a western look, and they're hunting whitetails. Well, we've got a lot of that in Kansas that we can show you bigger deer than they ever had up there,
Mhm.
and similar look.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where, obviously the cost per acre is
Mhm.
it's when, depending on where you're coming from in the country, where you're looking, you're like, man, I can get maybe 2 times as much acreage or maybe even 3 times as much acreage, depending on where you're at. But I also don't think the income per acre, like that delta gets bigger in my mind. Like just
It
looking at
does. Well,
potent,
again, that's specific to peeps,
yeah.
but there's also another factor. I know guys that bought 240 acre pieces and they have one stand on it.
Wow.
So you also have to factor that in, right? If you're coming to deer
Yeah.
hunt and you're like, hey, I bought this piece, but this 240 really only has one spot that I think is the spot.
Good. Yeah.
Um, Whereas if you buy 240 acres on the northeast portion of the state, up in the hills along the river, I mean, 240 acres, you could have 10, 12 spots. You could have tree stands all over it.
Hmm.
So again,
What would you rather have?
um,
240 with one awesome spot in a good neighborhood, or a
how awesome a spot
240.
are we
What's
talking?
so we're
Depends
just
on what
we're
that one spot is.
yeah. So you would take the one spot on a 240 versus like 8 on a 240. So okay, I'm gonna lay it out here. 240, there's one true good stand location, period.
Mhm,
And then let's say, because the cost I assume is going to be higher in the other part of the state. So let's say it's a 160,
mhm.
and you have 6 or 7 good spots, and the age class there is average to good, and then the age class on the 240 with one spot, we'll say, is like a great, like teetering to excellent, but
That's a
great.
no-brainer for me. I take the one spot
Really?
all day long.
Yeah.
I've seen it too many times. I mean, if you're in a good neighborhood that isn't getting a lot of pressure and the age class is there. So, you know, a good friend of mine up in Manhattan, his name's Jim Bath. The guy's killed more big deer than any of us combined. But his favorite thing to say is you can't kill them if they're not there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You can own 10,000 acres and have 20,000 stands, but if there's not a 200-inch deer on it, you're not going to kill a 200-inch deer.
Yeah.
You can have one stand on 10 acres, and if there's a 200-inch deer on it, you
You have a
might get
chance.
him.
Yeah, you have a chance. Yeah.
So, to me, it's all about age class, neighborhood pressure.
Hmm.
I like hunting unpressured deer. It's a lot different experience than hunting deer that get harassed.
And is that just because it's more fun? They're more predictable. I mean, or
Yeah,
is
they're
it,
more active.
or
I mean, just in general, they're more active, right? You,
mhm,
you see them more. They're doing deer things more in times that we could be out there, right?
mhm.
Deer are always going to do the thing, but is it going to be 3 a.m. or is it going to be when the
Right.
sun is still up?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
and
that's a great point.
I prefer to see them, right?
Right. I think we all do. And that's the yeah, that's what we're all trying to figure out. So it's
Yeah,
a it's a
yeah,
pl it's
that's
a
the
place to
game.
go do that. Because I think, I mean, that's ultimately when people that buy ground is because they want a good experience. They wanna have good hunting memories, and that's different for everyone. I
Yeah.
think there's a whole spectrum of that. But at the end of the
Yeah,
day, they
and
wanna
for
see
us,
it.
it's not unique to just deer either, right? I have a he's under my desk right now, but I have a Brittany. I love
Mhm.
chasing quail pheasant. Absolutely love it. That was my first love as a hunter. Um, I want to do it as long as I can. So there is that factor as well. That for me, to the draw out west is that I get to chase a lot of upland birds as well, and we're really in a good comeback phase right now with our quail and our pheasant. So.
And do you think that's just a lot of the initiatives of additional CRP, or with the
I don't
spraying that you're
know.
mentioning? I mean, what do you think
To some
triggered it?
I don't know. I mean, to me, I honestly think things are cyclical. Just like bell bottoms come back and bad haircuts come back. I think the quail came back. The turkey are down. Kansas. I don't know if you heard this or not. Kansas canceled the fall turkey season statewide.
Mhm,
Uh, we've limited our spring harvest to one bird. Used to be two. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I don't know why. I don't know
mhm,
why the birds are down. I mean, I think I know why. I mean, we had 3, 4, 5 years in a row that during the spring when they were nesting, we had massive floods. And I think that wiped out a lot of nests and wiped out a lot of the regenerative process.
mhm,
Do I think Mother Nature will take care of that? Absolutely.
mhm.
Do I think we're doing the right thing by limiting the harvest? Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in a state where, I see way too many people coming out and baiting for turkey, and I'm like, "Man, knock it off."
That's
But
crazy.
yeah, don't bait for turkey. Call 'em in. Like,
Is
you're
that
missing.
legal or is that legal or illegal in
It's
Kansas?
100% legal. Yeah. Yeah, it's legal. And, I think you're missing the point if you're out doing that, though. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
what's the fun in that?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, come on, call
Yeah.
'em
Yeah.
in.
That's um yeah, that's interesting. I didn't even know that was I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, it might not be for much longer, so.
Yeah, hopefully. So this is I read a publication here recently, and so obviously the entire country has seen a strong rise in land prices the last
Mhm.
couple of years. That's no one can. That's just fact. And so the recent publication showed that the prairie states, Kansas was included, was one of the strongest market for appreciation over these last 2 years. And so they showed that for the four-state average, the average appreciation from 21 to 23 was 18.55%. Would you agree
Yep.
with that? Is that what you've seen as well?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been pretty strong.
Yeah. Which
So, yeah.
I found interesting out of all the they broke it down in different segments of the country. And then the single biggest jump was Kansas.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. I think I don't know why that is, but, there's a lot of farmers that I know and speak to on a regular basis, and they all kind of, chuckle and get grumpy about this, but they're like, "Whoever thought playing on this piece of dirt would pay more than farming it?" And
Yeah.
that's kind of what it's turned into, and I think that's part of, the recreation side of it, but I think what that is driving that is that people do see that you can still buy good ground for $2,000 an acre out here,
Mhm.
whereas a lot of the country has moved away from that, right? Um, so the quality of deer we have for $2,000 an acre, you can buy more acreage and still chase world class deer. That's probably better than where you came from.
Mhm.
And that combination has created this influx of interest in purchasing, which just drives the market up.
Yeah. I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. So, how long do you think that trend can continue? So, does it eventually price out, or does the age quality or the hunting quality end up diminishing, or both?
That's a tough question, but I don't know. If I knew, I'd probably be doing something more interesting with my life right now. But my guess would be that it would continue to escalate a little bit. I think the days of $2,000 an acre in Kansas are probably numbered.
Yeah.
I think if you can get in, I actually just had a conversation with a guy in Dallas who's a land investor about this an hour ago. That if you can buy something that's a high end property, and it's got a one in front of it or a low two in front of it when you're buying it per acre, then you need to buy it right now.
Mhm.
If if uh, if you wait, there's going to be a loss taken.
From the opportunity cost.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where there's always this conundrum to investing or speculating or whatever it is. It's like, okay, so you guys seen the fastest appreciation in the entire country in the last 2
Mhm.
years. So does that trend continue? Does it, or is that the one that's going to see the biggest dip? And how to explain this? Like, let's go to on Twitter. There's all these posts right now that I'm seeing about people that bought. This is very specific and kind of off the tangent, but in San Francisco, people bought, let's say, a townhouse for $3 million a
Mhm.
year ago, and now it's showing all these different losses of people selling at a major loss. Now, obviously, there's a lot to that, and San Francisco's a mess and everything else. But
Yeah, I have a hard time comparing Kansas and San Francisco, but
yeah,
yeah.
but I'm just saying, like, okay, that was
Yeah,
one of the fastest appreciating markets for the housing, and it's also one of the first ones to really see a
yeah,
pounding. And so,
but I do think housing is far more regulated, and the lifeblood of housing in residential is far more tied to interest rates than land.
mhm,
We see a lot of cash buyers. We see a lot of 1031. We see a lot of um, investment groups, and people that have different income levels than the guy taking a loan uh, to buy a house.
yeah,
So, I think your demographic is so much different that that's hard to compare. Anything that's urban or rural, versus rural is pretty much apples and oranges in my mind. But I think if you look at counties that are getting big influxes of out of state buyers, um, that could tell you a little bit of information. I think is interesting. I also look at, right now when we see this big influx in prices, the ones that are going to maintain and keep that and continue to grow are going to be the good properties.
mhm,
So um, one of the things I've always done in the years past is I look for the overgrazed piece of crap property that looks terrible, doesn't show well, not too many people are interested in it. And I say, is there water? And what is it lacking? Basically do an ecology study on it to say how's our soil, how's our native grass population, what's our pollinator situation, um, how many invasive trees or weeds are in here, what can we do to clean this up, and if we do, what does this property look like then? And
Mhm.
that's kind of my barometer when I look at these properties. I know there's deer on it. Do I want to see big deer on every property I buy? Absolutely. Do I have to? No.
Okay.
I want to see how I can take it from A to B and how big of a gap from A to B is there,
Mhm.
and how much effort and money will it take to get it there.
In that
Uh,
rough example, how many years do you think it takes to it's obviously size dependent and everything else, but this is like a rule of thumb. Obviously, it takes a couple of years usually to establish native grasses. And is that
yeah.
kind of the timeline you have to look at?
Yeah, but you got to understand that all this soil out here has seed that is 100 times older than any of us sitting in it.
Mhm.
The one factor it's going to come down to is rain. The restoration of a property has nothing to do with what you plant. It has everything to do with what if it rains or not.
Yeah, that's something I'm not even yeah, that's not really what I'm used to here.
Yeah,
The
dude.
seed
Yeah,
bank is there. The seed bank is
welcome to the
there.
West.
Yeah, yeah, the seed bank is already there. It's
Yeah,
like
the seed bank's out there. There's been years and years and years of seeds out there. Um, Strip disking is a really common practice that I use. It's just simply running a disc. You don't want to run too deep and everything else, and you're going to stir up some weeds that you don't want to stir up also. But if you can control that and work with that, there's a lot of seeds sitting in the soil, but we have to get timely rain. And if you can work your dirt and do things around rain that you see forecasted and coming in, and hopefully it does hit,
mhm.
you can do a lot of stuff pretty quick. But to answer your question, I think 2 years minimum if you get rain. Um, if you're lucky, you could get a little quicker than that. I have a 660-acre piece right now that I'm been restoring for 2 years in Barber County. That's man, it went from the grass was half an inch. I
Uh-huh.
mean, it was dirt for 660 acres. It's insane. I mean, it was overgrazed, abused. Took 25 loads of trash out of the place, old barbed wire. I mean, it's just a mess.
Mhm.
And you go in there now, and the grass is up to my waist, and everything's starting to come together and look really good. There's a lot of quail in there. There's a lot of deer in there. There's turkey in there. But the one thing that place had going for it was it had live water. And even on drought years, it still has live water. And if you've got that, you've got a lifeline to make a property pretty good.
Mhm. And so is there when you restore something like that, is there EQIP money or NRCS money to do that, or is that just simply you doing that? Because
Uh,
because like
there's
CRP, obviously you need cropping history. So if it was this overgrazed pasture, there's really not that opportunity, correct?
there's not, yeah, no, but you can, what a lot of people don't know is you can fertilize native grasses. If you can time that with rain, you can really give them a bump.
Mhm.
If you're trying to restore and regenerate, that really helps a lot. Um, but the NRCS stuff, so Kansas has a deal where we can buy, sandhill plum thickets, American plum, different habitat enhancing plants that are approved through the state that are native, and we can buy them at a discounted rate.
Mhm.
They're really cheap, and we can buy a bunch of them. So I always look into that and say, what can I plant? How I can get plum thickets out here are money, right? That's protection. We have a lot of hawks. I think nationwide. I think some of our quail and upland problem is the amount of hawks we have. So those plum thickets are pretty important to keep the hawks from dive bombing your quail and your pheasant. And they produce fruit and everything else. So it's just a great plant to have. Um, you can buy willow stalks and plant them along the waterways. You can create cover and habitat that would not have been there otherwise without a whole lot of effort.
Sure.
Get a bunch of kids and family members get out there. Everybody get their gunny sack of stuff and
Yep.
start drilling a hole and planting. Move on to the next. Like, see how many you can get in a weekend.
Yeah.
And that's great time spent in the land.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it has to be extremely rewarding to see that piece go from where it was to where it's at today, and where it will be for in the future,
Yeah,
based off the work you did.
I don't think there's anything better. I think that's a great investment of time and energy.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I guess with the what's this called the bull run of Kansas the last 2 years,
Oh
you
boy,
think
yeah.
that it's just obviously it can't continue at the trajectory. My opinion is that it can't continue at that same trajectory. Do you think it levels out? Do you think it still continues to rise with the rest of the country? Do you think?
I think it
Kansas,
continues.
it just got caught up because it was underpriced during this period, and people are like looking at all these different states and they're like, well,
No, I
Kansas
think
might be
it's
a good place to invest.
not necessarily. I think it could be tied back to inventory as well, right? Um, it has to be in order to buy it, it has to be available.
Right.
And people overlook that, right? There's a lot of ranches like right now that I'm talking about that have not been available for 100 years,
It's crazy.
but they're aging out.
Hmm.
And I think part of what we're seeing in Kansas is just that is that there's people aging out, and some of this stuff's becoming available that you could have never ever ever got your hands on in the last 100 years.
Hmm.
So there is a factor of that plays into this as well. So I
Hmm.
just think the availability of some of the inventory has gone up in certain places, and that's driven some of that stat as well.
Hmm. And so I kind of, I can guess what you're going to say with some of this, but let's say someone is getting ready to buy their first farm, whether they're a Kansas resident or maybe they're looking to buy in Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, wherever. What's some of the pieces of advice you would give someone to buy their first farm? I mean, what's the Jeff Simpson checklist?
Oh man, I guess I'd want to know why you want to buy it. What are your goals for land ownership, and if it's deer or whatever, that's great. If it's recreational, but you got to understand that you got to have food, water, cover. Um, and I think knowing that, how do I word this? Knowing that you've got to put work in to develop one of them, right? Most of the people that are buying their first one aren't buying a premium ranch. It's already done and completed.
Yep.
I think that's accurate. So when you're looking at your first one, you're going to have something that's deficient on that first piece of property that you buy. So is it going to be water? Is it hopefully not water? Is it going to be water? Is it going to be food? Is it going to be cover? And know that it's going to take resource. So if don't max your budget out on just buying the dirt, because you're going to need some money to either hire dozers or use a skid steer in there or plant just there's things that need to be done to
Hmm.
make it what you think it needs to be. So I think understanding that process a little more clear helps first time guys out a lot, because I know I went into it super naive on my first one. I was like, this costs what? That was years ago. And now it's like, no, I laugh at it now, but there is a lot more that goes into it if you want it to be, a great property. So, uh, you want to make sure that you're helping people understand that. And I think they'll have a lot better experience if they do.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and I think you're exactly right because I think a lot of people they buy what they can afford, and a lot of times what they can afford isn't a premium property, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's some of the fun. That's part of the process of what makes land so exciting is you get to go learn all those different things. You talked about being naive. Being naive is kind of the fun part of it because if you knew
Yeah,
everything, you might not do it, and
yeah,
then
exactly.
you
Yeah,
just build a callus and you figure it out.
yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, it's fun stuff though.
Yeah, and so basically okay, so food, water, cover, and then don't max out your budget. Understand that you're probably gonna have to pay for some improvements, whether that's your time as money or it's quite literally, hiring someone
Yeah,
that has the equipment or resources or know how to do
equipment rentals, that all that stuff. I mean, don't
it.
underestimate that stuff. Is basically what I'm saying.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. And so, what about from you talked about like being in a good neighborhood. I mean, how sometimes it's I almost feel that you never have all the information, which makes it really challenging.
Trust your gut.
Regardless, yeah. So you just trust your gut.
Trust your gut.
That's what I always say too.
Use your eyes. Keep your eyes open. I mean, anyone that doesn't walk every square inch of a property, especially when you're first buying, is crazy. But you know, I always walk fence lines, especially in heavily timbered places. I'm looking for trees that look like they had a tree stand in it. Doesn't even
Yeah.
necessarily have to have a tree stand in it. Look
How
for
big of a
fresh.
turnoff is that for you?
It's a pretty big turnoff.
Uh huh.
I've seen that go south fast. But if there is a spot that has a bunch of stands, maybe they're really good deer managers. I don't know, but I certainly want to have a conversation with before I put my time and money into the piece that's going to be next door to it.
Hmm.
Get a simple conversation to say, hey, I'm thinking about buying this land over here. What do you guys know about it? And you're going to get the dishonest, honest response from them every time.
Yeah.
But the more time you spend with people, especially neighbors, the less snarky it gets.
Yeah.
I think the truth starts to reveal itself the more time you invest. If you think you're going to get it in one conversation, you are not. I promise.
Hmm.
Um, Spend a little time with them, see what makes them click. Are they farmers? Are they ranchers? Are they hunters? Do they live there? Is that their full-time residence? Is it, know all of that kind of stuff. Do they have dogs that can get out and run through all of your property as well as theirs? That's a great thing to know. I've seen that happen. That's terrible.
Hmm.
Um, there's just a lot of things that you have to go the extra mile on when you're buying a property that has neighbors right next to it. Um, in heavily pressured areas. Like I said,
Hmm.
I don't want to own everything. I just want to own everything that touches mine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, which never ends, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It never ends. Yeah, that's funny. So, uh, what about what keeps people from unsuccessfully identifying a good farm to purchase? So maybe they're going through some of this stuff, but what's something that would be overlooked? And I think to your point, maybe find the beat up piece that you can improve. I think that's a great one. But what's something that people unaccess? It's been a long day already. It's
There we
what
go.
are some things that people unsuccessfully identify to find a good farm to purchase?
Uh, oh man, that list could be forever. I mean, some of the things I've seen overlooked too often would be perimeter fencing. If I'm next to a cattle ranch and they've got bad perimeter fencing somewhere, I want to know about it. Um, if I'm next to a cattle ranch and the neighbors to the other side, I always want to talk to them and say, "Hey, is this guy's cows all are his cows always out?"
Yeah.
um, I had that problem on a property a year ago to where we planted like 60 acres of food plots, and the neighbors' cows got in there. And before we knew it, there was 100 head in there, and it was gone.
Oh my gosh.
You can't replace that. I mean, I'm sorry, it only goes so far. It's the same thing I tell my kids. It's like, I'm sorry, it doesn't fix much.
Uh huh.
And that food's gone for the whole winter. That food, a lot of effort, time, money went into that, and then
Hmm.
it's like, man, that stinks. So the other thing is water gaps. A lot of people don't pay attention to water gaps when it comes to fencing. If you are next to cows or anything else that can get out, so the water gaps where the creeks would cross your property and go to the next one. A lot of those times, that fencing needs to be loose and allow debris to flow through when it floods and rains. But if debris can get through there, a lot of times cows can get there too. So um, I've seen that cause a lot of heartache for people trying to plant food plots and all that. So if there is a water gap, we try to have a secondary fence close that keeps them. If something does get through there, kind of keeps them corralled. But little stuff like that, I think, can add up.
Hmm. Yeah. What about obviously Kansas is you mentioned rainfall being such a slave to rainfall. Wh- What I mean, that's just one of those things you can't control. But does that make you nervous? Does that keep you up at night at all on rainfall, or it is what it is?
It is what it is. I mean, a weatherman in Kansas is an unbelievable profession, but um, this
Why?
year,
Because it's always 0% chance of rain.
oh man, you're always wrong. I mean, if they say unless it says 75% or better, you have no chance of rain. I mean, none. It might
Uh-huh.
as well say zero.
Uh-huh.
Um, so and it's crazy how these storms, because you got to think about it. We're pulling off of the Rocky Mountains. They're pretty close to us, right? That's a neighboring state. So you've got all this jet stream coming off the Rocky Mountains, and then you've got this Gulf air coming through Texas and Oklahoma and meeting. That's why we're Tornado Alley, right?
Hmm.
So it just creates insane weather patterns, and you can't predict any of it. I mean, you think you might be able to, but you can't.
Yeah.
So you kind of take what you get in the rainfall category. But like this year was fantastic. Our grass, our pastures have never looked better than they look this year.
Hmm.
Um, Knock on wood that we don't get a fire, but we have a lot of grass right now. It's fantastic. Quail season's in full swing right now, and the populations are doing really well because they've got a lot of ground to stay in.
Hmm. So you mentioned you worked with investors and you've helped other people find parcels.
Mhm.
What's a piece of advice that you've learned from someone else that you always consider when you're looking at land? It could be just an old saying. It could be anything.
Uh, Man, I have to think about that one, but you know, buy low, sell high.
That's classic. Yeah.
That's a good one, but but there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, if I think anyone, investment wise that gets involved in that, when I work with these group of investors, the first thing we're looking at is county averages. Like, so what's our breakdown of our land? What is this, pasture land? Is it waste ground? Is it tillable? Is it, what's our breakdown of water? What's our breakdown of everything resource wise to identify what the property is? And then we look at that and we say, okay, versus the county averages, where do we stand? If you're 50th percentile or above, is that, I mean, it comes down to your hold, right? If you're 50th percentile, you better be talking 5 to 10 year hold. If you can get something bought down in that 20th percentile or, somewhere there, then you might be able to do a 3 year hold.
Mhm.
Um, but it depends on how much work you need to put into it and capital investment and that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of ways to evaluate the investment properties in what your returns are going to look like and what your recreational value is going to look like. And that's something we've got pretty good with. That's kind of the lure of what we do and
Mhm.
some of the stuff I really like.
Do you think that people think that they can do a project too fast on a farm? Do you think that's maybe a misconception? Because I mean, what you mentioned is makes perfect sense. Of depending on how long you have to hold it is directly correlated with your price entry. That's the
Yeah.
best way to summarize that. Um, and I think that there's buying and selling farms. I think everyone is trying to do it in some capacity. Like everyone's talking about it. Like it's almost an everyday conversation for myself, or I'm sure for you. Like, man, I just want to buy a farm and work on it for a year and sell it and buy something a little bit better. Do you think that that is a realistic goal, or do you think it's kind of pie in the sky?
I don't like 12-month deals. I think on paper and in conversation and sitting here at the desk, it sounds great.
Yeah.
But once you're putting your boots in the dirt and you're looking at the property, I think accomplishing that much in 1 year is a pretty tall ask.
Hmm.
Um, a 2 year hold, I think, is a really short hold. I think a 3 year hold, you're starting to get realistic. I like fives better because you can actually take. I mean, you think about it in the lifespan of a deer. You can
Yeah.
change a property in 5 years, right? I can have fawns from year one that found a food source or found a new water source that I put in, and now that's become normal to them. Whereas the ones when you inherently first get there, it's not. It's all change, and
Hmm.
whitetail don't like change.
Hmm.
So you can change the pattern and behaviors and the availability of the deer, and and how you see them and how they function. My favorite thing is guys get in on a property, they haven't done anything. The first thing they do is put blinds up. I'm like, what are we doing? Like you plan on doing all these things that are going to alter the property, which is going to change how the deer use the property. So the
Right.
last thing that should go up is a blind.
Hmm.
Create the things that create movement, then create your spots. So
Hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's a great point, and I think what about okay? So in that same idea, so someone saved up their money, right? And they're like, I want to buy something. And knowing that it's going to be a 3 to 5 year hold, this is something that everyone struggles with, I'm sure, is like, if I pull the trigger and I deplete my cash, is this the best deal or is this the deal that I can live with for the next 5 years? Because I mean, that's the realistic thing here.
yeah,
It's like, okay, I have my cash. This is it. I think this is it. You buy it. And then, 2 years later, you're like, dang, I wish I would have done this. Do you see that actually play out? Because I know a lot
a
of times
little bit.
people buy it, they're happy with it. And there's always the other opportunity. There's always opportunity out there. But explain that balance.
The only time I see that happen is when a guy buys a piece and he doesn't use it as much as he thought he would.
Hmm.
That's when that scenario comes into play for sure.
Hmm.
But if someone's enjoying the land and working on it, I actually see the opposite happen. It's like, oh, I'm going to keep it for a year or two, and then they end up keeping it for 7.
Yep.
They fall in love with it, and they have an emotional attachment, and they want to keep it longer. So that's the more common scenario that I see. The guys that don't use it as much or don't get out there and don't see the improvement and don't visually have this connection to it, those are the ones that end up being, let's just get out of this thing.
Hmm.
And that all comes down to how you got in, right? What percentile were you in when you got in, and where's the market at now? And do you have to make X return, or can you just get out, get your money out, and move on?
Hmm.
But I think if you're a savvy buyer, you're in land, I think you're going to be okay no matter what.
Hmm. Is there any key ways to avoid buyer's remorse when it comes to buying land?
I've never had it, so I
Neither
don't
have
know.
I.
I love land. I mean, I could take the ugliest piece and try to make it just a little bit prettier, and I feel pretty good about that. So,
Uh-huh.
um, yeah, I can't really comment on that because I've never had it.
When did you buy your first farm? How old were you?
Oh man, uh, I was probably right around 30,
Okay.
30,
And
31, somewhere there.
walk us through that. What made you want to buy it? And how nervous were you? Were you not nervous? You felt good about it? What was that like?
I bought it cheap, so I wasn't too nervous, and it wasn't very big. It was only 40.
Mhm.
Um, I loved it. It was great. I learned a lot real quick on that deal because there was 12 people that owned it. It was an air deal where there was quick claim deeds all over the place to get this thing
Yep.
done. So yeah, that talk about needing a real estate license when you don't have one. But overall the process was smooth and it was easy. I mean, I bought it back then. It was so cheap, so there
What
wasn't a lot of money
do you
involved.
remember what you paid for that on a per acre?
Yeah, I
We're
paid
all gonna laugh at it.
480
4
an acre. So I mean, I'm telling you, it wasn't that big a deal,
Yeah.
and it wasn't very big, but man, it was great. Um, what's funny is like one of the smallest deer I have mounted is right there, and it came off that property, and it's the only one in my home office here, just because there's a emotional connection there. But
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool.
yeah, so it was just an awesome piece. I had a lot of good times there.
What do you think that piece is worth today? Just so we can do the math of, like,
So that was
how much.
Potawatomi County.
Okay.
That piece right now would easily bring 4,500 an acre.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah, I should have
How
kept it.
many roughly how many years ago was that?
I'm 47, so it's 17 years ago ish.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's a big return.
Yeah, that's a monster return, which, because it's just funny, like, you hear those stories, like, the further west you get, like,
Hmm.
that conversation right there was the '90s in Iowa, or, like, the very early '90s, maybe the
Yeah.
2000s, wherever, but so I guess that kinda lines up, but not quite exactly,
Well,
but
I mean, I've got a landowner right now that I'm working with that bought his ground 8 years ago for 800 an acre,
wow.
and he's getting ready to sell it for 2,300 an acre.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's a pretty good return in 8 years.
That's excellent. That's crazy. Yeah. And so, I mean, this the question is like, well, is obviously to find that price entry now, I'm going to say is impossible, or not quite impossible, but you might as well have a horseshoe. But do you think that type of return is realistic for the future of Kansas? Because I feel like a lot of markets have matured in my mind. That's the best way I can describe it. Is like I just feel that some markets mature
Yeah,
faster.
yeah. It just depends on how I say this a lot, but it depends on how you define maturing because I still think, I mean, everybody overlooks it. I still think it's an inventory thing. I still think it's,
Hmm.
in communities that are ranching communities, they're not in the business of selling ground.
Hmm.
They're in the business, because you got
Buying
to
and holding
realize,
forever.
yeah, further out west, these are legacy ranches that have been in the same family for over 100 years. And what's causing it is this next generation isn't there.
Hmm.
They've moved on, they're not ranching. So now some of that ground's coming for sale.
Hmm.
That's the only difference.
Interesting.
And I think that's what drives a lot of this, and so a lot of these costs, I mean, I see cost basis of $100 an acre on some of these places. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, they have massive capital gain issues in a lot of these places. But, when they age out and they hit that point of needing money, or God forbid, some medical reason, requires the family to need money and they sell, that's why you're seeing this. I don't think it has anything to do with what the rest of the country is doing,
Okay.
but I think it has to do with that.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because these are huge farming and ranching communities. They don't exist because of buying and selling ground.
Hmm.
Um, they buy ground and they hold ground forever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Because that's the other interesting thing about that, because it seems like there's those pockets of the country where land hardly ever changes hands, and
yeah,
so to your point, when things do, they sell high. But I also think in the same idea, a lot of times when that seal is broken, so let's say it's owned by the same family for 100 years, someone buys it, and then to your point, they buy it, they love it. 7 years later, they think they want to sell it, and I feel like that begins to really accelerate the change of hands of land, and maybe that's
well,
different.
I think that, and also when you buy, let's say, 4,000 acres
Hmm.
and you sell off 1,000 of it, and then that next time around, that 1,000 gets broken into 500s, or quarter sections.
Yep.
That creates that same piece of dirt has created 15 transactions,
Yeah.
right? Whereas it was one piece not
Have you
too long.
seen that? Have you seen that increase, or is
Not
this
too much. I mean, some on the really, really big stuff. I mean, if
sure?
something's 10,000, 20,000 acres, then yes, that can occur pretty easy. But for the most part, people try to keep them whole. Um,
Yeah, which is cool.
Especially, and it depends on why it's being. purchased. If it's being purchased to run cattle and hunt and farm and generate income, you you're going to want that acreage, right? And that comes down to water as well. Like, what's my water access through each piece? Where can I winter? Where can I? Because out here it gets so cold, right? I mean, Kansas gets really, really cold. So, what are my hills like? Do I have northern? Do I have protection against that northern and western wind? Do I have? There's a lot of things to consider for wintering cows out here.
Mhm.
You got to make sure that you're in tune with that, and your land can support it.
That makes sense. Well, is there anything else that you can think of that would be useful for someone that is mustering up the courage to buy something, or maybe they have something and they think, "Man, Kansas seems pretty cool." Is
Yeah.
there any other parting words of advice?
Um, Work with people that know the state. Make
I
sure
could
you
see the importance of that. Yeah.
Yeah, make sure you got someone on your side that can help you out. I cover the whole state, so I'm always happy to field calls on that and help people out. I think the more you know getting into it, the less surprises there are. And surprises in real estate are almost always bad. So
Typically, yeah. Every now and then you might get a good one, but yeah, for sure. Well, no, Jeff, I really appreciate your time and expertise in the state of Kansas, and I've been poking around and trying to learn it. And this conversation was really really interesting. But where can people find what you have going on?
yeah, simpsonlandgroup.com. That's the website, and you can get a hold of me through that anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, appreciate it.